The morning sun hadn't yet burned off the mist clinging to the glass towers of Tokyo's business district, but inside the headquarters of Kenshin Dynamics, the air already crackled with tension. On the 42nd floor, behind floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city like a king surveying his domain, a group of men and women in crisp suits gathered around a long, polished table. Their voices were low but urgent, their eyes fixed on a series of charts and diagrams projected onto a screen at the far end of the room. This wasn't just another meeting. It was a crisis session. At the head of the table sat the company's CEO, a man in his late 50s with silver-streaked hair combed back neatly and a posture so straight it seemed carved from stone. He rarely raised his voice, but when he spoke, everyone listened. His reputation was built on precision, discipline, and an unshakable belief in order. In his world, everyone had a place, and staying in it was a sign of respect. Right now, that world was unraveling. A massive project worth over $100 million was teetering on the edge of failure. The new global cloud infrastructure they'd bet the company's future on was glitching, lagging, and costing them clients by the week. No one in the room had been able to fix it. Outside the boardroom, down a quiet hallway lit by soft overhead lights, a woman pushed a cleaning cart with quiet efficiency. She moved without making a sound, her rubber-soled shoes whispering against the marble floor. Her uniform was simple: dark blue pants, a matching shirt with the company logo stitched neatly on the chest, and a pair of gloves she'd just removed to adjust a wobbly wheel on her cart. She wasn't supposed to be near the executive wing during business hours, but a last-minute spill in the hallway had called her up from the lower floors. She'd been told to clean quickly and leave. As she worked, the low hum of voices from the boardroom drifted through the slightly ajar door. She didn't mean to listen, but the frustration in their tone was hard to ignore. Something about server clusters, routing protocols, latency spikes, technical terms she hadn't heard in years, but ones that still stirred something deep in her memory. She paused for just a second, glancing toward the open doorway. Through the gap, she could see whiteboards covered in complex diagrams, arrows looping into knots, boxes labeled with acronyms like QNet and EdgeSync, timelines marked with red X's. It looked familiar. Too familiar. She shook her head and turned back to her cart. That life was behind her. These days, her job was mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and making sure the executive bathrooms always had fresh hand towels. She'd come to Japan 5 years ago after everything fell apart back home, after her husband passed suddenly, leaving her alone with a teenage daughter and mountains of medical debt. Engineering jobs had dried up in her city, and even with her degrees and experience, no one was hiring someone starting over at her age. So she'd taken a chance on a work visa, found a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and accepted the only job she could get: night custodian at a major Japanese corporation. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Her daughter was now in university, studying biology, and that was all that mattered. Still, sometimes, like now, old instincts flared up. She remembered late nights in Silicon Valley labs, whiteboards just like these, teams huddled around problems that seemed impossible, until someone saw the pattern no one else did. She finished wiping the last of the coffee stain from the hallway carpet and glanced once more at the boardroom. The door had opened wider now, and she could see the CEO standing, arms crossed, staring at a chart with a look of deep frustration. One of the younger engineers was nervously explaining something about bandwidth bottlenecks, but the CEO just shook his head. "We've tried that. It doesn't scale." The woman took a slow breath. She knew what they were missing. It wasn't the bandwidth. It was the handshake between the legacy encryption layer and the new quantum routing protocol. They were forcing old logic into a new system, like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. She'd seen this exact problem before years ago, during a project that had nearly collapsed under the same weight. The fix had been elegant, almost simple once you understood the mismatch, but she said nothing. What would be the point? She wasn't part of that world anymore. She was invisible here, just part of the background like the potted plants or the climate-controlled air. She turned her cart and began to wheel it away. Just then the CEO's eyes flicked toward the doorway and landed on her. His expression changed instantly. Not anger exactly, but something sharper. Impatience mixed with mild disgust, as if she'd interrupted a sacred ritual. He stepped toward the door, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "This is a closed meeting," he said, his voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of authority. "You are not permitted in this area during strategy sessions. Please leave immediately." She stopped, her hands tightening slightly on the cart handle. She didn't argue. She didn't explain that she'd only been cleaning a spill. In this building, in this culture, questioning a superior wasn't just rude, it was unthinkable. So she bowed her head slightly, the way she'd learned to do in her time here, and murmured, "Hi, sumimasen." "Yes." "Sorry." She turned and walked away, her steps measured, her back straight. But inside something burned, not shame, but a quiet ache. Not because she'd been scolded, but because she knew with absolute certainty that the answer to their $100 million problem was sitting right there in that room. And no one could see it. Back in the service elevator, she pressed the button for the basement level. The doors closed slowly, sealing her off from the gleaming world above. As the elevator descended, she stared at her reflection in the metal doors. Tired eyes, hair pulled back in a practical bun, hands rough from cleaning chemicals. She looked nothing like the woman who used to lead engineering teams, who'd once presented at international tech conferences, who'd designed systems used by millions. But the mind was still there. Later that night, long after the executives had gone home, she returned to the 42nd floor for her regular shift. The building was quiet now. The only sounds the hum of servers and the distant whoosh of the air conditioning. She pushed her cart down the hallway, stopping outside the boardroom. The door was unlocked, someone had forgotten to secure it. Inside, the room was a mess. Coffee cups, crumpled papers, whiteboards still covered in frantic scribbles. She hesitated. Protocol said she should just clean and leave. But something pulled her in. She stepped inside. The diagrams were even more detailed up close. She traced a finger lightly over one of the flow charts, not touching the surface, just following the logic with her eyes. There it was, the flaw. They were using a load-balancing algorithm designed for static data centers. But their new system was dynamic, shifting workloads across continents in real time. No wonder it was failing. The old method couldn't adapt fast enough. She remembered her own solution from years ago, a hybrid protocol that used predictive routing based on real-time traffic patterns. Combined with a lightweight handshake that didn't bog down the quantum layer, it had cut latency by more than half in her old tests. She'd published a paper on it, though no one had paid much attention at the time. Now, standing alone in the darkened boardroom, she felt a strange urge, not to prove anything, not to get recognition, but simply to help. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was hope. Or maybe it was just the quiet voice inside her that refused to let a good idea die. She walked over to the desk where the CEO's leather portfolio sat, slightly open. On top lay a blank notepad and a pen. She picked it up, her hand steady despite the years away from this kind of work. In neat, clear handwriting, she sketched out the core of her idea, a simple diagram with 3 key components and a few lines of explanation beneath it. She didn't use jargon. She kept it plain. Root decisions should happen at the edge, not the core. Use lightweight tokens to verify path integrity. Drop legacy handshake. Replace with time-synced validation. At the bottom, she added one sentence. This reduces latency by 63% and cuts energy use by 28%. Tested in 2018, works. She didn't sign her name. She didn't need to. If they were smart enough to understand it, they'd figure out who left it. If not, it would just be another piece of paper tossed in the recycling bin. She placed the notepad back on the CEO's desk, right where he'd see it in the morning. Then she turned off the lights, closed the door softly behind her, and went back to her cart. The rest of her shift passed in silence, mopping, wiping, organizing. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt like herself again. And somewhere deep down, she hoped, just a little, that someone upstairs would finally see her. Not as the woman with the mop, but as the mind that had just handed them a lifeline. The city outside slept, unaware of the quiet revolution that had just taken place in a boardroom high above its streets. But by sunrise, everything would change. The next morning arrived with the usual rhythm of the Tokyo skyline, gray lights softening into gold, trains humming beneath the streets, and the quiet hum of a city waking up. Inside Kenshin Dynamics, the 42nd floor stirred to life earlier than most. The CEO was already at his desk by 6:30 a.m., black coffee steaming beside a stack of unread reports. He hadn't slept well. The weight of the failing project pressed on him like a physical thing, tightening his chest every time he thought about the board's next meeting. Investors were growing impatient. Clients were pulling out, and no one had a real solution. He reached for his leather portfolio, flipping it open to review his notes before the day's first call. That's when he saw it. Tucked neatly beneath a folder labeled QNet Final Review was a single sheet of paper. Not company stationery, just a plain notepad page, the kind found in every supply closet. His brow furrowed. He didn't remember leaving this here. He picked it up. At first glance, it looked like scribbles, simple lines, boxes, arrows. But as his eyes traced the layout, something shifted. This wasn't random. It was a system diagram, clean, logical, elegant even. And underneath, in careful handwriting, a few short sentences explained a routing method he'd never seen before. The claim at the bottom, reduces latency by 63%, made him scoff out loud. Ridiculous. If such a fix existed, his team of top engineers would have found it weeks ago. He was about to crumple the page and toss it into the bin when a knock came at his door. "Come in," he said, still frowning at the paper. Dr. Aiko Sato stepped inside. She was the company's lead systems architect. Brilliant, meticulous, and one of the few people he trusted completely. She'd stayed late last night running simulations, her eyes bloodshot from screen glare. "You're here early," he said, setting the paper down but not hiding it. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, rubbing her temples. "Kept thinking about the handshake bottleneck. We're forcing the quantum layer to validate every packet like it's 2010. It's choking the whole system." He nodded slowly. "Exactly. And this," he gestured to the notepad page, "claims to fix it with some edge-based token system." Aiko's eyes flicked to the paper. She stepped closer, curiosity replacing exhaustion. "May I?" He handed it to her. She read it once. Then again, slower. Her fingers traced the diagram lightly, as if afraid to smudge the ink. A quiet huh escaped her lips. This is actually brilliant," she murmured. The CEO raised an eyebrow. "Brilliant? It's missing half the specs. No code, no test data, no—" "But look," she interrupted gently, pointing to a small detail he'd overlooked. "See how the validation token is time-synced instead of session-based? That eliminates the need for constant back and forth with the core server, and routing decisions happen locally at each node based on real-time load. It's adaptive, self-correcting." She looked up, eyes wide with realization. "This isn't just theory. This has been tested. The numbers, they're too specific to be made up." He stared at her, then back at the paper. "Who left this?" "I don't know," she said. "But someone on this floor knows more about distributed systems than anyone on our team." A cold prickle ran down his spine. He remembered the janitor from yesterday, the woman he'd dismissed so sharply. She'd been near the boardroom. Had she seen the whiteboards? Listened in? It seemed impossible, and yet— "Check the security logs," he said quietly. "Find out who was in this room last night after hours." Aiko hesitated. "You think it was staff?" "I don't know what to think," he admitted. "But if this works, we can't afford to ignore it, no matter who wrote it." Within an hour, the building's security team pulled footage from the hallway camera outside the boardroom. They fast-forwarded through the empty hours until just after 11 p.m., a familiar figure appeared, pushing a cleaning cart, glancing around before stepping inside. She stayed for less than 10 minutes. When she came out, she looked calm, almost peaceful. The CEO watched the footage 3 times. Each time his chest tightened a little more. That woman, the one he'd told to leave like she was a disturbance, had walked into that room and solved in minutes what his best minds couldn't crack in weeks. He felt a strange mix of shame and disbelief. How had he missed this? How had they all missed this? "Run a simulation," he told Aiko. "Use her model. See if it holds." She didn't need to be asked twice. By noon, she was hunched over her workstation, fingers flying across the keyboard, feeding the proposed architecture into their test environment. The rest of the engineering team gathered around, skeptical at first, then increasingly quiet as the results began to stream in. Latency dropped. Not by 10%, not by 30%, but by 61.8%, almost exactly what the note had predicted. Energy consumption fell. Error rates vanished. The system didn't just work, it sang. One of the younger engineers let out a low whistle. Who is this person? No one answered. Later that afternoon, the CEO called a short emergency meeting with his inner circle. He placed the notepad page in the center of the table. We have a choice, he said, his voice quieter than usual. We can pretend this came from one of us. Take credit. Move on, or... He paused. We can find out who really wrote this and treat them like the asset they are. There was a long silence. Then Aiko spoke. If we hide this, we're no better than the companies we say we're trying to disrupt. Innovation doesn't care about job titles. He nodded. He knew she was right. But finding the woman wasn't as simple as knocking on a door. She worked nights. She kept to herself. Most people didn't even know her name. The HR file listed her as Evelyn C., American, mid-40s, hired through a third-party staffing agency. No background beyond general custodial services. The CEO asked the night supervisor for details. She's quiet, the man said. Always on time. Never complains. Her daughter's in university, I think. Studying science. That small detail, studying science, struck the CEO harder than he expected. This woman wasn't just cleaning floors to pass time. She was building a future for someone else, while her own brilliance gathered dust. He made a decision. The next evening, just before the night shift began, he waited near the service elevator on the 42nd floor. He wore his usual suit, but his tie was looser, his posture less rigid. When the elevator doors opened and she stepped out, card in tow, gloves in hand, she froze for half a second. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed quickly by caution. She bowed slightly. Good evening, sir. He didn't return the bow. Instead, he held out the notepad page. Did you leave this on my desk? She didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Just nodded once. Yes. Why? A small pause. Then simply, because it was broken, and I knew how to fix it. He studied her face, the calm, the lack of arrogance, the quiet certainty. You're an engineer. I used to be, she said. Now I'm a cleaner, but you still think like one. She gave a faint smile. Some things you don't forget. He took a breath. Would you be willing to explain this to my team? Not as a suggestion, as a solution, she hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Dignity, maybe. Or the memory of being told just days ago that she didn't belong. Will they listen? She asked softly. They'll have to, he said. Because if this works, and all signs say it does, you just saved this company millions. Maybe more. She looked at the floor for a moment, then back at him. I'll do it. But not in my uniform. He understood immediately. Of course. We'll arrange something. As she turned to begin her shift, he added, and, thank you, she didn't reply. But the way her shoulders relaxed, just slightly, told him everything. That night, while the city slept, the woman mopped the same hallway where she'd once been told to leave. But something had shifted. The air felt different, lighter. Not because she expected praise, but because for the first time in years, her mind had been seen. Not as a relic of the past, but as something alive, useful, needed, downstairs in his office. The CEO stared at the simulation results glowing on his screen. 61.8%, a number that could rewrite their future. And it had come from the most unexpected place. He picked up the phone and called Aiko. Tomorrow morning, he said, we're clearing the boardroom. And we're inviting someone new to the table. Aiko didn't ask who. She already knew. By dawn, the news had begun to ripple through the building, not as gossip, but as quiet awe. The janitor who fixed the impossible problem. People who'd walked past her for years without a second glance now wondered what else they'd missed. But she didn't care about that. She cared about her daughter's tuition, about proving to herself more than anyone that her knowledge still mattered. And maybe, just maybe, about showing a room full of powerful people that brilliance doesn't wear a suit. Sometimes it wears gloves and pushes a mop. The next morning, she would walk into that boardroom again, not as an intruder, not as staff, but as the person who held the key to their survival. And this time, no one would tell her to leave. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Kenshin Dynamics boardroom, soft and golden, casting long shadows across the polished table. Outside, Tokyo buzzed with its usual rhythm. Trains, traffic, the distant hum of a city that never truly slept. But inside, the air was still, charged with a quiet kind of tension. At one end of the table sat the CEO, His usual sharp posture softened by something new, uncertainty, maybe, or the first stirrings of humility. Around him, executives and engineers shifted in their seats, some sipping coffee, others glancing at their phones. But their eyes kept drifting toward the empty chair near the center of the room, the one that had been deliberately left open. Downstairs, in a small staff changing room tucked behind the maintenance wing, the woman stood in front of a mirror adjusting the collar of a borrowed blazer. It wasn't hers. Aiko had brought it from home the night before, along with a pair of black slacks that fit surprisingly well. "Wear this," she'd said gently. "Not because you need to look like us, but because today they need to see you as your whole self." She hadn't worn office clothes in years. The fabric felt strange against her skin. Too smooth, too formal. But she smoothed it down anyway, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the hallway. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent. Her heart beat a little faster with every passing floor. She wasn't nervous about the technical part. She knew her solution inside and out. What unsettled her was the weight of the moment. The fact that, for the first time in a long time, she was walking into a room not to clean it, but to speak in it. To be heard. When the doors opened, Aiko was waiting. No words were needed. Aiko simply nodded and led her down the hall. As they entered the boardroom, conversation stopped. Heads turned. Some faces showed curiosity. Others, skepticism. One older executive barely glanced up from his tablet, as if this were a waste of his time. But the CEO stood immediately. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice steady but softer than usual. She nodded. "Thank you for inviting me." She took her seat. The chair felt too big, too important. But she sat straight, hands folded in her lap, eyes calm. "Before we begin," the CEO said, turning to the room, "I want to be clear. This isn't a presentation from our engineering team. This is a correction from someone who saw what we missed. Please listen with open minds." A few exchanged glances. One man cleared his throat. But no one spoke. Then she stood. She didn't walk to the front with drama or flourish. She simply rose, walked to the whiteboard still covered in yesterday's tangled diagrams, picked up a marker, and began to erase. The room watched, silent. When the board was clean, she turned. "You've been trying to fix a routing problem," she said, her voice clear and calm. "But you've been treating it like a traffic jam." "It's not. It's a language barrier." That caught their attention. She drew a simple line down the center of the board. On one side, she wrote legacy system. On the other, quantum layer. Between them, she drew a broken bridge. Your old system speaks in long, formal sentences, full handshakes, session IDs, verification steps. Your new system speaks in shorthand, quick, efficient, time-based signals. When you force them to talk using the old rules, the new system stutters. It waits, it backs up. That's your latency. She paused, then added, "You don't need to slow down the new system. You need to teach the old one to understand shorthand." She began sketching her solution. Simple boxes, clean arrows, a small token symbol that pulsed with timestamps instead of session data. She explained how each node could make routing decisions on its own, using real-time load data, without checking back with a central server every time. She described how the time-synced tokens prevented spoofing without adding delay. And then she did something unexpected. She turned to the skeptical executive, the one who hadn't looked up earlier. "You ran the simulation with static traffic patterns, didn't you?" He blinked. "Yes, standard protocol. That's why it failed," she said gently. "Real traffic isn't static. It spikes, it shifts, it flows like water, not like a train on tracks. My model treats it like water." She walked to the laptop at the end of the table, typed in a few commands, and pulled up a live demo she'd prepared the night before, a small-scale version of the system running on a private cloud. She introduced a sudden surge of simulated traffic from 3 different continents. On screen, the old system choked, latency spiked, errors flashed red. Then she switched to her model. The traffic flowed, smooth, instant, no hiccups. The room was utterly still. Even the executive who doubted her leaned forward. Eyes wide, Aiko broke the silence. "We ran your numbers again this morning. With real-world variables. Latency dropped by 63.2%, energy use down by 29%, and 0 packet loss during failover tests." Someone whispered, "How long have you known this?" The woman turned. I designed a version of this 6 years ago. It worked then. It works now. Then why? The CEO began, then stopped himself. He didn't need to finish the question. They all knew the answer. Because no one had been looking. Because she'd been wearing a uniform, not a badge. Because in their world, janitors didn't solve $100 million puzzles, but she had. The CEO cleared his throat. If we implement this, how soon can we deploy? 2 weeks for a pilot, she said. 6 weeks for full rollout, if your team is ready to adapt. We're ready, Aiko said firmly. One by one, the others nodded. Even the doubter gave a slow, respectful nod. Then the CEO did something no one expected. He walked to the front of the room, stood beside her, not in front of her, not above her but beside her, and said, "This company made a mistake. We assumed expertise only lived in certain roles and certain titles. Today we've been reminded that real intelligence doesn't announce itself with a business card. It shows up quietly and fixes what's broken." He turned to her. "Will you help us rebuild this, right?" She didn't smile, didn't gloat, just met his gaze and said, "Only if you promise to look harder next time." He nodded. "We will." After the meeting, people lingered. Some came up to thank her. Others asked technical questions, their tone now curious, not condescending. Aiko stayed by her side, beaming like a proud friend. But the real moment came later in the hallway, when the CEO stopped her before she could slip away. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "You don't owe me anything," she replied. "Just don't make the same mistake again." "I won't," he said. Then after a pause, "We'd like to offer you a role. Senior advisor on infrastructure design. Full benefits. Office on this floor." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'll consider it, but only if you do 2 things. Name them. First, start a blind review process for technical proposals. No names, no titles, just ideas. Let the best solution win no matter who sends it." He nodded slowly. "And the second? Fund scholarships for young women, especially those from backgrounds like mine, who want to study engineering in Japan. Too many get told they don't belong. I was one of them. My daughter shouldn't have to be." He didn't hesitate. "Done." That night she returned to her apartment later than usual. Her daughter was waiting, curled up on the couch with a textbook. "You're home late," the girl said, looking up. "Everything okay?" She sat down beside her, tired but calm. "Better than okay." She didn't tell her everything, not yet. But she did say this. "Today someone finally saw me for who I really am." Her daughter smiled, sensing the weight behind the words. "I always see you, Mom." And in that moment, all the years of silence, of being overlooked, of pushing a mop while holding a mind full of code and logic, they didn't vanish. But they lost their sting, because today in a boardroom high above Tokyo, the invisible had become undeniable. And tomorrow she wouldn't just clean the floors, she'd help build the future. The weeks that followed felt like watching a river change course, slow at first, then all at once. What had begun as a quiet correction in a boardroom soon rippled through every level of Kenshin dynamics. People who used to walk past the cleaning staff without a glance now paused to say good morning. The night crew noticed it first, janitors, security guards, kitchen staff, how the air in the building had shifted, like someone had opened a window in a room that had been sealed for years. But the real change started with the presentation. 2 weeks after that first meeting, the woman stood again in the same boardroom. This time not as a visitor, but as the lead. She wore the same borrowed blazer, though now it felt less like a costume and more like armor. Around her sat not just executives, but clients, big names from Europe, North America, even Singapore, who'd heard whispers of a breakthrough and demanded to see it for themselves. She didn't use flashy slides or dramatic music. She simply walked them through the problem, the flaw in their old thinking and the elegant fix that had been hiding in plain sight. When she finished, there was a silence, not the kind that meant doubt, but the kind that comes right before a room full of people realize they've just witnessed something rare. One client, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, stood and clapped. Then another. Soon the whole room was applauding, not for the company but for her. Afterward, over tea in a smaller conference room, the silver-haired client leaned forward. "You could be leading your own firm," she said quietly. "Why are you still cleaning floors at night?" The woman smiled. Because I made a promise to myself and to my daughter. I wouldn't let go of who I am, but I also wouldn't forget where I've been. This job kept us afloat. It deserves my respect, the client nodded slowly. Then I hope Kenshin knows what they have. They did. And they were starting to show it. Within days, the CEO made good on his word. A new internal program launched, Project Clear Lens, where technical proposals were submitted anonymously. No names, no departments, just ideas. The first round produced 3 solutions from unexpected corners. A cafeteria worker with a degree in mechanical engineering, a receptionist who'd coded apps in her spare time, and a warehouse technician who'd redesigned a logistics algorithm on his phone during breaks. Each was given resources. Each was listened to. But the bigger shift was cultural. Meetings began with a simple rule. Assume the smartest person in the room might not be the one speaking loudest. Managers were trained to ask quieter team members for input. Interns were invited to strategy sessions. And yes, even custodial staff were asked during routine check-ins if they'd noticed anything unusual in the server rooms or network closets. Not as a formality, but because someone had finally learned that observation isn't tied to a job title. Meanwhile, the woman split her time between 2 worlds. By day, she worked with Aiko and the engineering team, refining the rollout of the new system. She didn't take a fancy office. She chose a small desk near the back of the tech floor, close to the whiteboards and coffee machine where engineers could stop by with questions. She answered them all, patiently, clearly, never making anyone feel small for not knowing. By night, she still pushed her cart. Not because she had to. Her new advisory role came with a salary that eased the financial pressure, but because she wanted to. I'm not leaving my people behind, she told Aiko one evening as they walked past the maintenance lockers. They kept me grounded when I thought I'd disappeared. Her daughter noticed the change too. You walk differently now, she said one night over dinner. Like you're not carrying something heavy anymore. I'm not, the woman replied. I finally put it down. Back at Kenshin, the results of the new system began to speak for themselves. Within 6 weeks, the $100 million project wasn't just back on track. It was outperforming projections. Client complaints dropped to 0. New contracts poured in. At the quarterly investor call, the CEO didn't just report success, he credited it. We were saved, he said plainly, not by a miracle, but by someone we almost ignored. Her name is Evelyn Carter. And she reminded us that talent doesn't wear a uniform, it wears many faces. The statement made headlines in Japanese business circles, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so rare. In a corporate culture built on hierarchy and seniority, admitting you'd been wrong, and that the answer came from the bottom, was almost unheard of. Some traditionalists grumbled. Too much Western idealism, one retired executive muttered in a newspaper interview. Respect must be earned through position, but younger employees pushed back. Online forums buzzed with stories of overlooked colleagues. A popular tech blog ran a feature titled The Janitor Who Fixed the Future, and though it never used her full name without permission, it sparked a quiet movement across Tokyo. Companies began quietly reviewing their own hiring and listening practices. Then came the scholarship announcement. At a small ceremony in the company's main lobby, attended not by press, but by students, parents, and staff, the CEO stood beside the woman as they unveiled the ClearPath STEM Fund. It would support 10 young women each year, with priority given to those from immigrant families, single-parent homes, or non-traditional educational paths. The first recipient, a high school senior from Osaka, who'd taught herself coding through library books and YouTube tutorials. When the girl accepted the award, she looked straight at the woman and said, "You made me believe I belong." The woman's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "You always belonged," she said. "You just needed someone to see it. Not everyone changed overnight." There were still days when an executive would absent-mindedly hand her a coffee cup to toss, forgetting she wasn't on cleaning duty. There were still whispers in hallways, skeptical glances from those who thought this was just a PR stunt. But those moments grew fewer. What mattered more was what happened in the engineering lab. One afternoon, a junior developer, a young man who'd joined straight out of university, stayed late, frustrated with a bug in the routing protocol. He'd been staring at the screen for hours. The woman walked by on her way to a meeting, paused, and asked, Stuck? He sighed. I think I'm missing something obvious. She pulled up a chair. Didn't take over, just asked questions. What happens if you simulate a time drift here? Have you checked the token expiration under load? Within 20 minutes, he saw it. His face lit up. Oh, that's it. He turned to thank her, but she was already walking away. Later, he told Aiko, she didn't give me the answer. She helped me find it. That's how real teachers work. And that was the heart of it. She wasn't there to replace anyone. She was there to lift everyone up. The CEO noticed the shift too. In meetings, people spoke more openly. Ideas flowed faster. Mistakes were admitted without shame because they were seen as part of learning, not failure. The company felt lighter, more alive. One evening, as he reviewed the latest performance metrics, he found himself staring not at the numbers, but at a photo on his desk. His daughter studying abroad in Berlin, pursuing a degree in environmental science. He thought about how proud he was of her. And then he thought about the woman who'd fought so hard to give her own daughter the same chance. He picked up his phone and sent a short message. Thank you for reminding us what really matters, she replied an hour later after her shift. Just doing my part. Now go fix something else. He laughed quietly. Then he got to work. By the end of the quarter, Kenshin Dynamics wasn't just profitable again. They were being called the most human-centered tech company in Asia by a major industry magazine. Investors loved the stability, employees loved the culture, and clients loved that the systems just worked. But the woman didn't care about the headlines. She cared about the quiet moments. The intern who stayed late to ask her about graduate programs, the night guard who now greeted her by name, the way her daughter looked at her over dinner, not with pity, but with pride. She still wore her uniform on cleaning nights, still wiped down the same boardroom where she'd once been told to leave. But now, when she passed the long table, she didn't feel invisible. She felt like she belonged. And in a world that often measures worth by titles and salaries, that was the most revolutionary thing of all. A year had passed since the day she'd been asked to leave the boardroom. Now she stood at the back of a grand conference hall in Osaka, watching as the CEO stepped onto the stage beneath soft spotlights. The room was full. Executives, journalists, university students, even a few government officials, all gathered for the Asia Tech Forward Summit, one of the region's most respected industry events. On the screen behind him, a simple phrase glowed in clean white letters. Innovation lives in unexpected places. She wasn't supposed to be nervous. She'd spoken in front of engineers, clients, even investors, but this felt different. This wasn't just about code or systems. It was about people, about the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, the ones who kept showing up even when no one noticed. The CEO adjusted his glasses and began. A year ago, he said, his voice calm but carrying through the hall, our company was on the edge of a very expensive failure. We had brilliant minds, cutting-edge tools, and every resource money could buy. But we were missing one thing, the courage to see beyond our own assumptions. He paused, then turned slightly toward the back of the room. We thought expertise wore a suit. We thought leadership came with a title. We were wrong. A murmur moved through the audience. Many had heard the rumors, the janitor who saved a $100 million project, but few had seen her in person. And so, the CEO continued, today I don't introduce a new executive or a rising star from our R&D lab. I introduce the mind that saved our future and reminded us what true innovation looks like. He stepped aside and gestured toward her. Please welcome Evelyn Carter. Applause rose. Not polite clapping, but something warmer, fuller, like the room itself was breathing a sigh of recognition. She walked forward slowly. Not in a uniform, not in borrowed clothes, but in a simple dark suit she'd bought herself. The kind that said, I belong here and I earned it. She took the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces and smiled. Not a big, showy smile, but the quiet kind that comes from peace, not performance. Thank you, she said. I'm not here because I'm special. I'm here because for a long time I was treated like I wasn't enough. Like my past didn't matter, like my mind had expired because my job had changed. She paused, letting the words settle. But ideas don't retire. Knowledge doesn't vanish just because someone stops paying you to use it. It waits, it watches, and if you're lucky or stubborn, it finds a way back. She spoke for 20 minutes, not about algorithms or latency, but about dignity, about how cleaning floors taught her to notice small things, the flicker of a server light, the hum of an overloaded circuit, the way people treat those they think can't help them. She talked about her daughter, about nights spent studying by flashlight after long shifts, about the shame of hiding her degrees in a drawer because no one would believe a custodian could have them. "But here's what I learned," she said, her voice steady. "Talent isn't rare. What's rare is the willingness to look for it in places you've been taught to ignore." When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Students stood. Engineers wiped their eyes. An older woman in the front row nodded slowly, as if seeing her own younger self in the story. Afterward, she didn't rush off stage. She stayed, answering questions, shaking hands, listening more than she spoke. A young woman with braids and nervous hands approached her. "I work in data entry," she whispered, "but I've been building an app in my spare time. Do you think, could someone like me ever present at a summit like this?" The woman looked at her, really looked. "Someone like you?" she said gently. "You're exactly who this stage was built for." Later that evening, back in her hotel room, she video called her daughter. The girl's face lit up on the screen, her biology textbook open beside her. "You were amazing, Mom," she said, eyes shining. "My professor showed your talk in class today." "Did he now?" she replied, smiling. "He said you're changing how companies think about people." She leaned back in her chair, tired but content. "I'm not trying to change the world," she said. "I'm just trying to make sure no one else has to hide who they are to be heard." Back in Tokyo, life at Kenshin Dynamics had settled into a new rhythm, one where brilliance wasn't reserved for the top floor. The Clear Path Scholarship had grown. 10 students had become 20. The blind review program had led to 3 major efficiency upgrades, all from employees no one had considered technical. Even the cafeteria, staff had proposed a food waste tracking system that saved the company thousands a month, but the biggest change wasn't in the numbers. It was in the hallways. One afternoon, a new intern, a shy young man from rural Hokkaido, got lost trying to find the server room. He wandered into the maintenance wing by mistake and nearly turned back, embarrassed. But then he saw her, not in a suit but in her old blue uniform, checking a water heater. "Excuse me," he stammered. "I'm looking for the tech floor." She looked up, wiped her hands on a cloth, and smiled. "You're 2 floors down, but since you're here, do you know why this building's hot water system is more efficient than most?" He blinked. "No. Because it recycles heat from the server exhaust," she said. "Engineering isn't just in the labs. It's in the pipes, the lights, the vents. Keep your eyes open." He nodded, wide-eyed, and hurried off, but not before glancing back, as if he'd just met a ghost who knew the future. That was the thing no one had expected. Her presence didn't just fix a system. It changed how people saw the world around them. The CEO noticed it too. In meetings, he now asked, "Who haven't we heard from?" before making decisions. He visited the night shift once a month, not for show, but to listen. And when a young custodian mentioned a strange vibration in the East Wing elevator, he didn't dismiss it. He called maintenance. They found a failing bearing that could have caused a serious accident. He'd learned to look. One rainy evening, he found her on the 42nd floor, not in the boardroom, but in the small lounge where engineers took breaks. She was sketching something on a napkin. Another idea maybe, or just a thought she couldn't let go. He sat across from her, holding 2 cups of tea. "You could have left," he said quietly. "After everything, you could have started your own company, written a book, retired in peace. Why stay?" She looked up, steam curling from her cup. "Because change isn't a moment. It's a practice, and someone has to keep showing up to make sure it sticks." He nodded. "You've given us more than a solution. You've given us a compass," she smiled. "Just don't lose it." As the year turned, her story spread, not as a fairy tale, but as a quiet challenge. Other companies in Japan began quietly reevaluating their own teams. A major bank launched a hidden talent initiative. A manufacturing firm started cross-training floor workers in basic coding. It wasn't perfect. Old habits died hard, but the seed had been planted, and through it all she remained grounded. She still lived in the same modest apartment, still cooked dinner for her daughter most nights, still believed that real success wasn't measured in headlines, but in whether someone felt seen. One Sunday morning, she took a walk through a quiet park near her home. Cherry blossoms drifted down like pink snow. An elderly man feeding pigeons nodded to her as she passed. A child pointed at a bird and tugged her mother's sleeve. Normal life. Beautiful in its simplicity. She thought about how far she'd come, not in titles or money, but in peace. The weight she'd carried for so long, the fear that she'd wasted her mind, that her best years were behind her, had finally lifted. Not because the world had changed overnight, but because she'd refused to disappear. Now when she walked into the Kenshin building, people didn't just see a former janitor. They saw a teacher, a problem solver, a quiet force who proved that respect isn't given with a job. It's earned with presence, with patience, with the courage to speak up even when you've been told to stay silent. And her daughter? She'd just been accepted into a prestigious research program, one that combined biology and data science. "I want to build systems that help doctors spot diseases faster," she'd said, eyes bright with purpose. Her mother had hugged her tight. "Then you're already ahead of me." "No," the girl had whispered. "I'm standing on your shoulders." That night, back in her apartment, the woman sat by the window, a cup of tea in her hands, watching the city lights twinkle below. She thought about the boardroom, the note on the desk, the CEO's frozen face when he realized what he'd almost thrown away. She didn't feel anger anymore. Not even sadness. Just gratitude for the chance to be seen, for the chance to help, for the quiet truth that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with a single person refusing to walk away. Outside, the world kept turning, but somewhere in offices and labs and classrooms across the country, someone who'd been told they didn't belong was picking up a pen, opening a laptop, or raising a hand, because they'd heard a story about a woman who cleaned floors by night and saved a company by day. And that, more than any algorithm or award, was the real legacy, not a miracle. Just a reminder, never underestimate the person no one is looking at.